Dear church, let's talk Hudson's story.
Dear church,
let's talk
Holy Spirit,
transformation,
prayer.
6 days, right?
And if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Our culture wants to define you by your sexuality. We know that our identity is found in Christ.
Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley, joined today by Catherine Jones. Catherine is a member here at the Walnut Street Church where I serve. Also, real estate agent and mother of two, married to Dan, a friend. And I wanted to have you on today because to kind of tell a story.
Right.
And it is a story of trial and tribulation and hope and good news, not so good news at times. Right. And it's a story about your son, Hudson.
Yes.
So Hudson is now three, right?
Yeah, just turned 3 a couple weeks ago.
Crazy. And Palmer is how old now?
He will be 6 next month.
Okay, so you and Dan have Palmer and Hudson.
Yep. And
I'm not going to give the story away. I'm going to let you tell the story, but just kind of walk us through what the last, I guess, 3 or 4 months have been, right?
Yeah.
Has it been longer than that?
It's been since February. Okay. Well, I guess really if we take it back to the beginning, it was around New Year's this past year.
Yeah.
And noticed that Hudson wasn't feeling good, but I mean, who wasn't at that point in the year? You know, everybody's got daycare and all the things. And so he was congested, but he had a little bit of swelling in his temples, and that's really what I noticed. And it was a Sunday, so I was like, you know, something just doesn't feel right with this. And so I took him to a walk-in clinic that day. They ran, obviously, all the tests. Came back and said he's got the flu. He's got flu A, and it's just swelling from the flu. And I was like, okay. But, you know, no other symptoms. Yeah. So we kind of waited it out for about a week, and, you know, the swelling just wasn't going away. So just something told me to keep pushing. So we followed up with his pediatrician, and she was like, yeah, something's not right here. Let's get a ultrasound of his head today. And I was like, oh, today. So the panic kind of started, and luckily my mom was in town and she went with me, and we did the ultrasound of his head, had the radiologist there that day. They were like, we want to get this read today. Okay. Which also kind of sets in a little panic of we're really rushing this. But they read it and they said, you know, everything, you know, we kind of did his head and his temples and his neck, and they said, yeah, you know, this could be from the flu. Kids can do that. Their parotid glands can swell, and it just goes into their temple. Okay. And it should just go away on its own. So we also did blood work at that point just to kind of see if anything was screaming at us. Mm-hmm. All looked normal. Okay. So, you know, they said, you know your child better than anyone. Just kind of keep an eye on him. Right. Continued to watch. Still, again, no fevers, no anything, but the swelling just was not going away. And at that point, we kind of noticed the swelling was getting worse, kind of in his eye area. And so we continued to push. And his pediatrician was great about, you know, let's take one step at a time. Yep. Let's figure out, because this isn't, you know, I think at the beginning, she was like, you know, don't go down these scary rabbit holes. Don't get on Google. Don't look at all the things, because he was swelling really on both sides and it looked the same. She was like, that's not typical of like a tumor or anything like that. That's probably not what it is. So don't go there in your mind.
Good advice.
We're like, okay.
I would have gone there in my mind.
Yep. And that's where we were. So we're like, we don't know what this is. Went back. It just was not going away. He had an ear infection that time. We did antibiotics. Cleared that up, but again, the swelling was not going away. Yeah. So the next step was obviously a CT. So she was like, at this point, we refer you out to Vanderbilt Children's Hospital, which is right down the road, thankfully. Yeah. So we got that in pretty quick. And at that point, it was February 7th. So we had already been a kind of a month into this. Mm-hmm. And really at that point, I think Dan and I both thought, we're just going to go and rule things out. Like, surely it's nothing. We're going to rule something out. It just needs time to go
Peace
down.
of mind.
Yeah. So that's what we thought we were going to get. And then we had that, you know, about midday, and we thought we'll go about our day, and they'll give us the results when they get them. No big deal. But I will never forget sitting in that CT room. And he did great with the CT, but I looked at all the staff there and the radiologist, and I just saw a look in their face, and I was like, something's not right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Take your time.
But I knew something wasn't right, but I just kind of pushed that to the back because I was like, it's going to be okay. Like, this doesn't happen to my child. Like, it's going to be okay. So pushed it to the back of my mind. We went home. We got Palmer from my mother-in-law's. You know, we were going to have a good weekend. It was a Friday. And we were just leaving my mother-in-law's, and his pediatrician was calling. So I just answered the phone, and I'm like, oh, it's going to be, you know, fine. We'll just say, hey, we'll just wait for it to go down. And she got on the phone, and she said, this is not news a mother should hear over the phone. And I thought, a killer. That's it. Yeah. It's just a shot to the heart. And so at that point, I'm like panicking, trying to get it on speaker so Dane can hear, because I've got him in the car and both boys in the back. So they're hearing everything. And she said, the HEMOC team at Vanderbilt Children's has called, and they have found masses in his face and kind of behind his eyes. And so at that point, I'm just kind of in panic, and I'm like, oh, what's HEMOC? And Dan was like, it's oncology. And at that point, I knew, this is not good. And so they were, at that point, they felt like we had a little bit of time. And if, you know, if there's anyone out there who has been through, you know, kind of that process, it takes a little time from that initial finding to get an actual diagnosis. So they had given us a couple of options. You know, the team was prepared to see him next week at clinic, or we could go ahead and go that night to the emergency room at Vanderbilt and get the ball rolling. And really my personality is let's find out what we've got. Let's hit the ground running. Let's get a plan and let's attack it. So we decided we were going to go that night. And thank goodness that we have so much family here. And so they immediately stepped in. It was my mom, my mother-in-law, my aunt, my cousin. Everybody was at our house. What do you need? Because obviously we have Palmer. And it's like, what do you do with him in this moment? Because we've got to rush to this, and he can't go sit in a hospital. And so they rushed in and really jumped in. And then that was kind of the start of that journey. And so we got there to the emergency room. And what they thought at that time was that he had what they suspected was neuroblastoma. So it was a form of cancer. But they really weren't sure. And what they kept telling us was that Hudson's case was very unique. It wasn't presenting like it normally would. It wasn't telling them definitively it's this or that, or they felt confident in that. So the next step was going to be biopsy to get those definitive answers. And at that point, we kind of got a plan together. We went home. And it's really hard, and I will tell anyone, the unknown and the waiting was the most excruciating part of that process. And so we are just so thankful that they moved so quickly on that. And so we went back on Tuesday to the ENT surgeon. He was like, I don't know what this is. This is not presenting. And at that point, we had also discovered over the weekend, we did additional testing and found out that he had additional masses on his lungs. And so we weren't sure what the connection was. And that's why they're like, this isn't presenting how anything normally would. And so we did the additional testing. We met with ENT. He said, let's get a biopsy so we know for sure what we've got. And at that point, we're like, whatever we need to do, like, let's keep going. Let's keep pushing, because we just want an answer of what we're up against. And I just remember thinking that whole first week and that initial finding and getting his actual diagnosis is, at that point, you feel so helpless and everything is out of your control. And it's just, all you can do is go to God in that moment. And so I just remember that whole first week, my prayer kept being, God, whatever this is, whether it's neuroblastoma or whatever it is, let it be the easiest thing for complete healing, the path to that. And let him, through this process, and let him, just Hudson and us, be a light to others as we go through this. And let that be what this is. And so we did the biopsy, we did additional testing. And as we were waiting on that, you know, we got news from doctors of, our oncologist who was the specialist in neuroblastoma was like, it's not presenting. And I really don't think it is neuroblastoma at this point. And it could be a list of, multiple things. And one of those is it may not be cancer. This may be autoimmune. We don't know why it's presenting like it is, and it's in his muscles. And so at that point, you're kind of in this up and down of, is it not? Is this something easy like that we could
Praying it is.
And praying it is. And again, I just went back to that prayer of whatever it is, let it be the easiest path to complete healing. Got the biopsy. We again did blood work just to say, hey, is anything screaming at us that would give us a direction? Or do we need to broaden back out? And so it wasn't. And so we kind of broadened back out. And ultimately, on Valentine's Day, which was the next Friday, we got the call from our oncologist that he had been diagnosed with leukemia. Yeah. And so for us, it was like we wanted a diagnosis so badly to know. But it's like the reality hits you. Yeah. And it's so hard because you're just helpless. And it's like, we don't know what this looks like. And I just kept thinking, and I think a lot of people think when it's a child, how and why a child? And I sat with that for a while. And as we have gone through this journey, I've really come, and been at peace with why not him?
Yeah.
Because he's so just the gentlest spirit and just the best attitude. And you can't help but love him. And so why not him?
Oh, I've noticed that in the times I've been up there to visit, going through chemo and the most difficult of circumstances with the chemo and handling all of that. And, thank you, Craig. Appreciate it.
Oh.
And just, you would never really know he was sick, and you've said this, but the doctors say it's good he's 2 or 3 now. Mm-hmm. He was 2 and he's 3 now because age makes a big difference in this. So he's got youth on his side, right? And,
absolutely.
And at this point, how are they saying that things are progressing as far as treatment? He's finished 3rd round of chemo.
Yep.
Let's start there, actually, before we go any further. What's the treatment look like now going forward?
Yeah, so at that point, we knew he had leukemia. And there really is 2 main types. There's AML and ALL. So it was going to take some time to differentiate because, again, Hudson had a unique case. It wasn't showing up in his bone marrow, which leukemia typically does. Yes. That's where they're going to find it. It was not in his bone marrow. It is not showing in his blood work. And so it was additional testing that we were going to have to do. I think looking back for Dan and I, it's like kind of our phrase through all this has been, today's a great day for a miracle. Yeah. And what a miracle that it wasn't. Yes. Because that can, make it so much harder to treat.
It's a whole other set of problems.
And it's been just such a blessing of like, that's one less thing for us. And so we ended up getting his official diagnosis. He was diagnosed with a really rare form of AML called myeloid sarcoma. Okay. And so this was something that Vanderbilt does not see often, which was kind of shocking for us. But at that point, we felt very confident in what their approach was going to be. Mm-hmm. And the treatment was going to be aggressive. So we got that diagnosis. They came and said, this is what we've got, and we're going to start treatment tonight. Yeah. And we said, okay, whatever it is, we're going to go with it. And so we just had a peace with that. Yeah, sure. And I think it probably was a blessing for us that we didn't have as much time to just sit with it and panic because it was just like, we'll go with it. So we started treatment. And so his treatment is very aggressive. So it's over 6 months, and most of that is inpatient. So we're admitted most of that time. So his is really, we're in the hospital 3 to 4 weeks, home a couple weeks, back in for 3 to 4 weeks, back home for 2 weeks. So we'll do that for about 6 months. So he has just finished up round 3 of his chemo. And so he's just been such a champ with that. And it's like, and we've said too, his age has been the biggest blessing because he is so blissfully unaware of what's going on. Yeah. And I notice, with both of our kids is they really feed off how we react to things. And so we've tried to make the hospital a fun place to be and really focus on the fun things they offer. And again, we're just blessed with Vanderbilt being such a great children's hospital that has so many things to make that process easier. Obviously he's becoming more aware of like, this is not so fun anymore. And I'm tired of being hooked up and I'm tired of being in a hospital. And, but he's just been such a light in all of that. And I think that the nurses have really gravitated towards him because he's just so fun-loving and great attitude and just takes it in stride. And that's one thing I've noticed, like you were saying, with age is if you go on that oncology floor, there are so many kids that are teenagers. And it's like they are so aware of what's happening.
Yes.
And we're just blessed that he is so young and that hopefully he will never remember this and that it'll just be a part of his story in the future, but he'll never remember.
Going up there, Vanderbilt Children's, we could make this a commercial for them, I guess. But, they've got, people bringing animals from the zoo and they've got a movie theater and you go to Hudson's room and he's got the bed with the sides on it and all the stuffed animals. And he's got every play toy in the floor that he can. And, recently when I was up there, he's got this port and they're feeding him chemo and he's running around and Dan's trying to tell him, hey, you don't get too far away, bro. You're tethered here, because he just is completely, like you said, blissfully unaware. Great phrase. Yep. And that's got to be encouraging.
It is. And we've said too, if he's good, I'm good. Yeah. It's the days and we've been so blessed in all of this. And again, it's just little miracles throughout this process that he's had such good days. He's, for the most part, and every round, and anyone who's probably been through this is, you feel like you get a handle on it and what to expect, and then it completely changes. And so it's just kind of rolling with the punches, and he's been great about that. And he's had mostly good days, which we're so thankful for. But we're ready for this chapter to be over.
This will continue until when?
We will. He's done 3, so we've got 2 more.
Okay.
And then hopefully we will be done.
And what are they saying so far? I mean, I noticed right away the swelling went down.
Yeah.
So that maybe I'm wrong. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm thinking, well, it's working, right?
Yeah.
So what are they saying as far as the prognosis going forward?
Yeah. So for him, and I think, something from the very beginning is Dan works at Vanderbilt. He's in the medical labs there. And so he has a background in that. And we almost know too much at this point.
That'd be tough.
So that was very apparent to doctors when we started this, when they were doing their daily rounds and they were talking and we had very specific questions. They were like, you know too much, don't you? And we're like, unfortunately, we do. Yeah. But it's been a blessing for him to know things and be able to ask that. And so obviously that the swelling was the biggest thing we noticed. And he didn't have fevers or anything, which is what most kids come in with. And low counts, he had none of that. His blood work was normal. Yeah. And so, for him, we're in a unique position that we can't do the traditional routes with bone marrow and things like that to track his progress. And so that has been a challenge for us in this because we so badly want those definitive answers.
Sure.
I think like anybody does, you want to hear those words, complete remission and that it's working. And so we've kind of been, not forced into this place, but, we've had to be at peace with God's doing this, and we have to be okay with the waiting because it's all going to happen in his time.
Right.
And so we are at this point, we will do some more imaging after this round.
Okay.
And as long as all looks okay at that point, they feel like they're going to feel pretty comfortable to say if there's no change or it does look improved that he has achieved complete remission, which is what we're ultimately hoping.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's the story, right? You summed it up well. Talk about how your faith has been woven throughout this, you and Dan's faith, and what role that has played in all this. You mentioned that a little bit, but you grew up here, right?
I did. Yeah. Born and raised in Dixon.
Yeah.
Grew up a member here at Walnut Street.
Right. So you're not new to the faith.
I'm not.
But new to this. So how's your faith played out in all this? You mentioned asking why, and I think that's okay. I mean, we have people in Scripture who ask God why. The psalmist, the Psalms really help me in times like that. Because they just lay it all out on the table. Yeah. This is what I'm feeling. And this, why God?
Yeah.
And you talked about that. elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah. And I think it's just human nature.
Sure.
Like, why? Like, I want a reason.
Yeah.
But and I think it's always been, it's not going to be always evident in that moment. And so you just have to trust. And for me, my personality is I want to have a system. I want to know. And so for something to happen that is completely out of my control, it's really put me in a place of complete surrender.
Right.
And so, again, my prayer was just give us a path to complete healing that's going to be as easy as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think we've seen those little miracles throughout of he's got such a great spirit. He seems completely unbothered. We don't have this crazy involvement all over his body. Yeah. He's keeping those things. And so I think that's made it easier. But for me, it was just being at peace with there is a purpose in this. And I think it's hard when it is a child because it's like, I would take this 1,000,000 times over instead of him.
Yes.
But I know I would not have handled it as well as he has. And so I think that's just, I've just felt this kind of pull throughout this whole thing that he's going to save someone's life.
Yeah.
He's going to be, and I think I've seen that throughout this. And obviously being back in Dixon, we lived in Knoxville for a bit. After college, I went to University of Tennessee, and that's actually where I met Dan, which ironically enough, we're both from Dixon. We just didn't know each other.
Didn't know each other here.
We
That
did
is
not.
So weird.
So we always make a joke that Dixon's kind of the biggest small town. But, and we really thought, and I think it goes back to, I've seen such a thread, and I've put pieces together of like how God has been weaving this story for years that we did not know. Yeah. And we really thought after we got married, we were living in Knoxville, and we thought we're going to raise our family here.
Sure.
And so I think like a lot of people, you have kids and priorities change and what you want changes. And so after we had Hudson, we decided we were going to move back because we really wanted to be back with our family units, back in a strong church. And so when Hudson was 2 months old, we moved back. And so, and I just look back and I'm like, that was God putting us back, because if we had not been here, we would not have, I don't think we would have been able to handle this because our family has been so instrumental in this and being there. Because something I think that's not talked about a lot is when you do have a child that goes through something like this and you have another child, you're living two lives.
Yeah.
You've got a life back home because the world doesn't stop because you get a diagnosis.
Right.
Like it's going to keep going. And so, trying to navigate that with Palmer and try to help him make sense of it too. Yeah. While also giving our, best efforts to Hudson too as we go throughout this. But we could not have done this without our family being here. And so they have stepped in and kept things moving for us as best as we can. And they bring him up to the hospital and see his brother. But they've really had that. And I just think that was God leaving that. And then when we moved back, Dan was kind of figuring out where he wanted to work. And at the time, his ultimate goal was to work at the VA. My mom and stepdad had worked at the VA hospital there in Nashville for 30-something years. And, it was like, oh, federal benefits, that would be great.
Yep.
But if anyone's ever, gone through that process with the VA, their hiring process is not quick. And Dan had actually done his medical lab science program at Vanderbilt, and he had kept those contacts there.
Okay.
And so when he was looking for a job and that was kind of taking a little bit longer, he was like, something's opened at Vanderbilt. I think I'm going to take that. And what a blessing and another thread, because how blessed are we that Dan is now working somewhere that has such a team of doctors that we would ultimately be there and be connected with all those people.
I don't suppose he receives any labs from Hudson.
He does.
He does?
He does.
Wow.
And that was something, obviously he can't do those labs, but we've had those conversations too of, once he went back to work, he was getting samples for kids and it was new diagnosis. And he was like, you relive that every time that comes through.
I bet. Yeah.
And so it's been hard to kind of navigate those pieces, but it was like another thread of like, that was God putting that in place so that we would be exactly where we needed to be with this team of doctors. And it was, and there's just been so many things. And another one is that Dan has an older brother that's a pharmacist, and He's been living in Montana for over 10 years, working up there. And he recently got married last year. And they moved to just over the state line into North Dakota. And he had been at the same hospital since he had moved there and took a new job. And I think it was at the beginning of the year. And he moved into specifically working in a cancer clinic.
Really?
And it was like another thread
Yeah.
of God, because what are the chances? I don't think it was coincidence. I think it was God of like to have someone that we trust so much be so well versed in all the medication that Hudson is getting that we can ask. And it was just like, I can see this thread that he has been weaving for so long to help us get where we are.
I had no idea of all that. I felt like I knew the story a little bit, but I had no idea all of that. And you're right. You can see how the providence of God just weaves its way through all of this.
Yeah.
And so as you sit here today, in all honesty, you feel like your faith is stronger or maybe under fire a little bit? I mean, where's
I
that?
would say it's stronger.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I see so many families, and you get, in the hospital, it's people from all walks of life and all backgrounds. And I've just found myself over and over, if I was in this situation and didn't have such a strong foundation in my faith, this would feel so hopeless.
Yeah.
Because I have to believe that there's a bigger purpose in this and that it's going to be okay. And that's what we made a pact very early on, that we would not go on Google. And I think, we've kind of kept our head in the sand a little bit. But I think for us, we both felt at peace with that, because it was like, God's got a plan in this, and we have to trust in that. And I think it's served us well up to this point. We haven't gone down any rabbit holes, and, we just rely and believe that God's putting people in our path that are going to give us the answers and, be able to help us get to our ultimate goal. And that Hudson's story is going to be a testimony for the rest of his life.
Really
to
is.
touch people.
Yeah. And it's, in a weird way, it's a beautiful story in that something good coming out of something, I think that's Romans 8, right? That something good can come out of something that seems so negative. And I'm like you. I've seen the little hints along the way. When you go to Vanderbilt Children's, you go to the floor where Hudson's at, and invariably you're going to meet some kids that are dealing with issues, and it's tough, right? And every time I've walked into that room with Hudson, he's playing, he's having a good time. I know he's not always up and going, but most of the time, and I know that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
When I leave the room, is like, okay, I can see what you say about if he's good, I'm good, because that's exactly what I felt like when I left the room. I was like, well, at least he doesn't act sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is he having any sort of residual effects from, I'm sure he is, chemo and things like that?
Yeah. So this round that we are just finishing up has been his first intensification round. So this one we were kind of
They bumped it up.
Anticipating that there would be some side effects. And so for him this round, he's had some tough days, and, he's had some head to toe rashes that really itch, and just loss of appetite, low energy. We've seen those hard moments, and that's when it is hard to watch that.
Sure.
But we have to just keep thinking, this is just...
It's a means to an end.
Yeah, right. So we never have to do this again. And we really work hard, and I think it's probably helped us to just... We know that we have to stay positive for him.
Sure.
Because he feeds off of that so much. And so this round has brought some eye drops that we're not a fan of, but we've just tried to tell him it's little raindrops, like nothing to be, scared of, because we believe he's going to be okay. And we want him to believe that too. And so we've, kind of had those same conversations with Palmer, because obviously being almost 6, he's a little more aware.
Yeah.
And I think at the beginning, it was hard for him to understand because Hudson didn't look sick.
Yes.
Especially once we started the chemo and his swelling was going down, and he was just not understanding of why in an instant did my life completely change, and mom and dad are gone, and brother's not here, and now I'm staying with grandparents, and that has been one of the tougher parts of this journey, is trying to help him.
Yeah.
And so I think he finally had the realization when he would come up to the hospital, and then Hudson obviously lost his hair.
Yeah.
And so we also tried to not make that a big deal. And of course, in true Hudson fashion, it was much harder on me to watch him lose his hair. And he thought, this is great. I look like my Legos. And I was like, okay, if you're good, I'm going to be okay. But for Palmer, it's been, the back and forth, and being home for a couple of weeks kind of spoils him. And then we notice a shift when we're gearing up to go back. And so it's just trying to help him process those feelings, which is a journey when we're trying to process our own.
No doubt.
Of how do you help such a small child understand this, but that he's going to be okay.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you next. You led into that. So, like, you've had conversations with Hudson and Palmer. What are those conversations like? Do you explain leukemia? What do you do?
Another great thing, again, we could be a commercial for Vanderbilt. They have some child life specialists there.
Good.
And that was something that we were totally unaware of when we started this, was how many people get involved in this process. Whether it's, you think of like PTOT, but there's also child life that come in and try to make things a little bit easier.
Sure.
And not just for the patient, but siblings. And so very early on, they're like, however you want to have this conversation, however you feel would be best, we'll let you do. But they sent us home with lots of books. Children's books. So my brother or sister has cancer, like, now what? And it really kind of breaks it down for them on a level they can understand. And so we've kind of talked through them with that, and we have those conversations, but it's also having those conversations of it's okay to be scared or upset that we're leaving, because we don't like leaving. Right. And so that's been the hardest thing for him, of why is this different? Right. Why is he there? I'm not. So we've had to try to figure out, and there's no, guidebook on this. That would be great if there had been. Yeah. That would have made this a lot easier, but there's no guidebook. And so we kind of take his lead of, what you're feeling, how can we talk through this, which does become harder when we're in the hospital and we can only see him a lot of times via FaceTime, which what a blessing technology has been in all this. For sure. That we could, and Dan and I have had that conversation too, of what if we didn't have this? Like, that would be so hard to not be able to communicate and still feel like we're there. And we've tried to do our best of, getting back for Palmer's things, like his kindergarten graduation. And I know this round they were ready to admit us on a Tuesday morning. And I was like, well, we're going to have to wait till Tuesday afternoon because Palmer's graduating kindergarten. And they're like, whatever you need to do. Yep. And then as soon as we got to the hospital, all the nurses were like, how was his graduation? I was like, well, now everybody knows. So they will become kind of our little family up there, which makes it easier. But it's definitely been hard to try to navigate that with him. And it's still a learning thing, but we're trying to find things for them to be excited about. Yep. And obviously Make-A-Wish is part of that. And that's something that was kind of an early gut punch for me, coming in to say he would qualify for that. And because in my mind, I thought terminal, that's what this is. So,
I would think that too.
Yeah. And they were the social worker was very clear of like, no, it's, any major diagnosis, but it gives them something to look forward to, and have help in planning. And we've seen better outcomes throughout treatment when they have something like that. So we've got his posters up in his room of his Disney World that he's excited to go to when we're done with this. Amazing. So it's helped with Palmer too, to give them both something that, we'll have this at the end, and this is what we're working towards. That's
awesome. How do people keep up with this journey if they want to follow you? I know on social media you give updates. Just maybe find you there? Yeah.
I do a lot of my updates, and we've kind of coined the term Hudson's Village because it does take a village, and we've got such a large one here, and we've kind of seen that go across the U.S. And so that's been really neat. And we really believe in the power of prayer. And we know that's gotten us where we are. And so I do a lot of those on Facebook with Catherine Jones or Instagram at the Cat Jones. So that's really where we're kind of documenting everything. And it's been neat to kind of look back on too, to see where we started to where we are. And it's definitely been a journey, but we're just taking it day by day.
Yeah. And I so thank you for coming on and sharing your story. And I want to let our listeners and viewers know that if you have a specific question about today's episode for Catherine, we'll make sure that she gets it. You can email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. Maybe you're dealing with a similar situation, and I know that she'd be willing to answer any question that you might have. And keep up with her and the journey of Hudson on Facebook and Instagram. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.